Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We're very happy to have you with us for this conference, Figuring Out the Twin Transition, Think Global, Act Local. And we have the privilege of having introductory remarks from Maria João Rodrigues, who's a former Portuguese minister of António Guterres with a long track record in the European institutions, and Paulo Solanilla, who is the Commissioner for Promotion of the City of Barcelona and responsible for economic promotion and Barcelona branding. Thank you. To you.
Good afternoon so much. First of all, let me say benvinguts in Catalan, bienvenidos. Welcome to Barcelona, to Maria João, la presidenta de la Fundación, who I have the pleasure to know her for a few years when I was working in Brussels. And Maria João is flying directly from the Red Sea, from Sharm el-Sheikh to the Mediterranean Sea. So I think the Mediterranean Sea is better than the Red Sea. So welcome to Barcelona. And let me say on behalf of the Rafel Campalans Foundation, the foundation of the Catalan Socialists, the Catalan Social Democrats, how important is this seminar for us. Not because it's a big seminar, but it's about one of the central topics of the future of social democracy and the future of Europe and the future of the world. So probably this afternoon we're going to tackle one of the critical points for the future. If there is progress or not, it will depend on the issues, most of the issues that we're going to mention this afternoon. And in that sense, I would like to share with you 5 comments that I think relevant for the debate and are relevant especially for a debate that takes place in Barcelona. First of all, I think we need to be clear on the analyze in which moment we are living, the moment of the world, the moment of Europe, the moment of cities. We are in an uncertain world, and a world that has lost the traditional configuration. So there is fear into the future, there is an uncertainty among all the population, and also among the institutions and the companies. We don't know exactly what is the direction that we have to take. In that sense, the 5 comments that I want to mention are based on the need to build up new coherences. And these new coherences are based on these 5, could be more, but I think I've concentrated in 5 comments. First of all, we need to win the battle or the fight of the ideas. We need to think slowly and act fast. But there is a temptation in today's world to act fast without too much thinking. So this is why foundations and social democratic foundations and the think tanks, we need to invest in reflection. We need to invest in ideas. And the ideas, especially in order to solve complex problems, it takes some time. We need qualitative discussions on the issues that we are tackling, even though we know that we need a sense of urgency. So there are urgent things on the table. So we need to win this fight, because there is a cultural revolution. There is a fight from the right-wing parties, and especially from the extreme right-wing parties, against the idea of progress that we are defending. So we need to win this fight of ideas. Secondly, we need a new public leadership. We need new public policies. We cannot live in the hands of the market and the companies, the responsibility to solve most of the problems that we have on the table. We need a new public leadership based in a public and private cooperation. We know that the implementation needs to be in coalition. It needs to be. We need the efficiency of the companies, the resources, the experience. But the vision where the world needs to go, it's a public leadership. It's needed a strong public leadership. So we need new policies. That's why we need to reflect and to think about these new policies, introducing innovation. And we not have to be afraid to introduce innovation. the unknown. We cannot have different results doing the same. We need innovation in our public policies. The third comment is about the role of cities. Cities are the laboratory for the future. We say think globally and act locally. We could say also think locally and act globally, because the cities are a good place to test these new policies. And cities like Barcelona, we are we are implementing certain leaderships because the big ideas are not only about big plans. Also, the future ideas need to be landed in proximity, the policy of affection, so the emotions, the emotional situation of our societies, and we need to have positive impact. And the impact, the immediate impact, are in the cities, in the territory. So cities are laboratory, and we need progressive cities in the front of this innovation of public policies. Fourth comment, I think that we could agree with the right-wing parties that there is a twin transition. This we could share, ecological and technological transition. But is the same a progressive policy that a conservative policy? Clearly no. What is the main difference between, or how we could implement this twin transition? How would we build up this new future? And from a progressive perspective, it's about competitiveness. We need a new competitiveness based in talent, in technology, obviously. We need growth, sustainable growth. In that sense, I think that what also differs of some other left-wing parties is about, we believe that it needs growth, we need growth, but sustainable growth, so competitiveness. Secondly, sustainability. Growth needs to be based on new coherencies. So we need to take care of the climate crisis with a sense of urgency, but also doing in a coherent way. And the third is the main difference with the conservative parties in Europe is about equity, social cohesion. They could defend competitiveness. They could defend fight against the climate crisis, but they will not defend with the same intensity and the same way the protection of the most desfavorable and the weakest people in the society. This is what makes us different and unique. The right balance between these three pillars: competitiveness, sustainability, equity, so social cohesion. And my last word, in order to give you the floor, Madam President. We need a smart marriage between the ecological and the digital transition. In Europe, we have called an European Green Deal. And I think that is a label that we can identify ourselves. But we have the risk only to be stuck by the big debates, the big names, and not to land into the territories, into the cities, into the rural areas, how this could be possible. The European Union needs to be more present in the territory. The Next Generation funds are mainly led and distributed by the states, in some cases by the regions, but we need an effort to land it in the cities, in the mid-sized cities, small cities, and big cities. It will depend, the success of the European Green Deal will depend on the appropriation of the people. If it's just a storytelling, we will fail. We need facts. We need to win the fight of ideas, but we need an action plan landed in the territories. I think, Madam President, these are somehow some of the ideas that I wanted to share with you, and I'm sure that coming from Sharm el-Sheikh, you will have also some fresh ideas. Not many good news, but some of them. And I think that the social democratic parties, the socialist parties, we need to be more proactive, more active, and to be able to push in a stronger way, in a progressive way, this twin transition that will make us unique. Thank you very much. The floor is yours. And welcome to Barcelona.
For this great introduction. I could not agree more what you just said. And this is again a great conference we are organizing here in Barcelona. It's a pleasure to come back. And now we are dealing with a very challenging theme, which is What can you do about these twin transitions, the green and the digital? And how should we think global and act local, but also the reverse, as you just said? This is a very difficult topic, but we are very pleased that we could count on the great collaboration, first of all, of our team in FEPS, the European Foundation of Progressive Studies, located in Brussels, plus the Friedrich Ebert Foundations, plus the United Nations University, and plus, of course, our local foundation, Campalans. The great cooperation for a difficult but very central topic. Well, in fact, I just came from Sharm el-Sheikh, and I'm worried with everybody because we could understand that in spite of 2 weeks fully concentrated in Sharm el-Sheikh, the final outcome is clearly below what we need to reverse the climate trends. And so we, humankind, we should be really worried because we need to go to other kind of negotiations to meet the Paris targets. The commitments which were taken are really below what is needed. We got some progress on recognizing there is loss and damage and that developed countries should help developing countries. But again, we are below what we need. So the question we are bringing today to this conference is, can the digital transition help to meet the climate targets and to step up this green transition? And this is a big question, because in fact, I think that the report we are launching today, which I believe is a great report, is proving that, yes, the digital transition can help us to meet the climate and green transition goals. Why? Because if we focus on the critical sectors of this transition, the energy sector, the agriculture, the industrial sector, the housing, the transports, we can in fact identify new digital solutions which will improve the way we manage energy, the way we organize these sectors, example, the circular economy in this industry, and we can reduce carbon emissions and restore a more, let's say, harmonious relationship with nature. So this is possible, and look, we are progressives. We really believe on the power of science if this is directed in the kind of orientation we need to have. But it's also true that the digital transition involves some risks. Risks of creating new inequalities between regions, between social groups. And it is also true that the digital transition can involve a loss of control, a loss of democratic control of a big transformation which would change everything in the way we live. So I'm very pleased that our report is coming with a set of 15 principles to make the digital transition really help the green transition. I need to be short, so I will not present the 15 principles, but I strongly recommend that you read our report. But let me illustrate with a powerful concept, which is the so-called green data spaces. This is a new concept. This means that the digital transition is building on us making the best of the big data about reality, about ourselves. This is, in fact, the infrastructure to the digital transformation. We can organize green data spaces to deal with the transports in cities, the way we reorganize manufacturing, the way we launch a new kind of agriculture. On all these, we need to have green data spaces, and also because this will strengthen the democratic control. We need to have them working at local level, at national level, at European and international level. And I also welcome the focus we are putting in this conference about the role of cities. So a laboratory for digital and green transition, for sure. So a panel dealing with cities, but also a panel dealing with the cooperation between the European Union and Africa, and particularly Northern Africa. I really believe that for us Europeans, this is a matter, in fact, of responsibility, but this is also, in fact, our own interest. Because as the paper is showing, we are no longer dealing just with the market cooperation between Africa and the European. We are beyond the concern just with security, migration. No, what we should do together is to focus on the implementation of our common agenda, which is the agenda for sustainable development goals. This is an agenda for all countries in the world. And we are late in Europe, and we are extremely late in Africa. But in the end, this is our common interest, that this agenda is really implemented in the ground, changing people's lives. And let me conclude my introduction to this conference by saying, well, it happens that in the framework of the United Nations, the Secretary General, who is coming from our progressive family, Antonio Guterres, someone I know really well, is calling for an important moment, which is the Summit to the Future, to take place in 2024, exactly to move forward with a new green, a new global deal, a new way for developing countries to work with developed countries and vice versa. And I really believe that at the core of this new global deal, we should make the best of the twin transitions, the green transition and the digital. That's why the conference today is really so important. And I'm looking forward the outcomes of these two big panels. So many thanks to all the authors of the papers and to the speakers of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your interventions. I'm now going to invite Mauro, Reinhilde, and Justin for panel 1. Thank you so much again for your interventions, Pau and Mireia, which are very, very relevant to what we're going to discuss. I was also at COP27 with Mireia, and it's definitely a certainty that there's an emergency and more needs to be done. So I'd like to introduce Justin to my right, who's a Senior Policy Analyst on Digital at FEPS, Foundation for European Progressive Studies. Mauro, to his right, who is Associate Researcher at United Nations University, working on the Comparative Regional Integration Studies Institute, which is relevant for this panel. And he's working on digital as well. And finally, Reinhilde, who is a research fellow at United Nations University working on energy. So, in EU policymaking circles, we really have this firm belief that green and digital transitions go together. The digital can really help the green transition, and we call this the twin transition. But there's also the beginning of an agenda for the externalization of a process that is starting to emerge with a geopolitical dimension. So in this panel, we're going to talk about whether this is likely to be successful. If not, why not? And we'll take a deep dive into the EU's green and digital policies and its cooperation with North Africa. So the question is, can the EU effectively reconcile its foreign policy ambitions and its value-driven twin transition? So we're trying to aim for a more developed understanding of policy developments in EU-North Africa cooperation on the clean energy transition and the digital transition. And we really want to also enable and facilitate deeper future cooperation on twin transition. So let's begin. My first question for the panelists is, how do you understand twin transition? What are the immediate implications that spring to the fore regarding the EU's cooperation with North Africa on twin transition? And can you outline the different phases that you have perceived in the policy study that you've done with FEPS, FES, and UNICRIS in the EU's approach to digital and energy policy cooperation with North Africa? So I'll give the floor to Mauro first.
Thank you.
To the right.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you also to the foundation, to the FEPS, and it's an honor for me to be here with you. And about the definition, this is the definition that we used in our study. And it's clearly a definition of a grand project involving new visions, as it was mentioned before, involving also a high level of cooperation, and implying an extensive mobilization of resources. And in this case, this project is aiming at twinning digital policies with green energy policies, and also in the relationships between the European Union and its neighborhoods. And as you can see here, these are two policies, of course, the digital one and the green energy, developed autonomously, and we can find traces in the relationships between the European Union and its neighborhood. But starting with the twin transition project, these two kind of policies started to be twinned. And the twinning was not, as for the digital, of course, is not a cold fusion. It implied a transformation of the way the European Commission, the European Parliament, the Council understood the digital transition. And the most interesting novelty is a new frame for digital policies that we have found that is a typical geopolitical frame, and which changed the priorities, the objectives, also the set of stakeholders that was allowed to participate in the elaboration of digital policy at the European level, and which also refocused digital policies at the European level, because now we have a focus on infrastructural issues and especially on supply chains and raw materials availabilities. This is a novelty for the European Union, and it is changing also the way that policymaking on digital issues is made also together and towards our southern neighbors. That is our first interest. And very quickly, is it my time finished? So, okay. Just to say that this project has been elaborated at the internal level with the new industrial strategy of the European Union, and then it has been projected towards beyond our borders, especially towards Africa, with the new strategy for Africa and the new agenda for the Mediterranean. And please.
Yeah, please, Reinhilde, if you can tell us more also about the energy side. Thank you.
On the energy side, maybe if I can I go back? No, I can't. Well, actually, on the energy side, I don't need to go back. I will just talk about it. When you look at the definition, they talk about the transformation. And I also prefer to speak about energy transformation and maybe also the twin transformation, because I think it's a societal transformation also from the energy side, as this event is about the cities. A city has to be transformed to be green. It's a whole new way of thinking about energy. And then when we focus then on North Africa, what is the project, its purpose here, we looked at how it transformed during history. Well, during history is the last 15 years approximately, how the EU approached its strategy towards Northern Africa. And what concerns energy, it started with a market approach. And you could very quickly see that it was actually because it was the competence of the EU. It knew it best how to work with other countries. So it wanted to have create a one electricity market with the Northern African countries. It launched, maybe you know it, Desertec, all the big projects that it would build solar plants in the Sahara and in the deserts. But actually those didn't fulfill, partly because maybe they were a little bit too ambitious, too big, and partly because they didn't take into account the Northern African situation. And we will talk about it later, about the enablers. First, you have to be sure that the enablers are here. Also in Europe, before you make a just transition, you have to be sure that the enablers are present. And that was what fell short in Northern Africa. After that market approach, it actually changed its approach towards more a security approach, and that was I don't know if you know, in 2006 there were already some problems between Russia and Ukraine. Again in 2009, then we had the Arab Spring, so Northern Africa wasn't that stable anymore, and the EU started to look more at a security approach. It saw that the Desertec, the renewable energy part, failed, and it went for a security approach and it looked again at its gas, as there were new gas fields found in Egypt, and they went back to their old way of thinking, actually, and that's what I also want to emphasize. And what I found from the study is that the EU, every time that it's becoming a little bit more difficult, it goes back to its older habits. It won't go for the more complex solutions that maybe are good for the future. No, it falls back on its old solutions, like let's go back for gas. But like for now, with the Ukraine crisis, demand-side management is much more complex. So just let's focus first on more fossil gas and more the easiest way, the things that we know that worked in the past. Let's just go for those ones. And maybe, I don't know, that's enough for an introduction.
And Justin, can you tell us maybe a little bit about how you see twin transition, especially in EU policy-making circles? What's your take on the rhetoric being used?
Yeah, thank you, Kevin, and very pleased to be here. Perhaps one quick clarification. I'm not one of the authors of the study. I'm actually replacing Amira El-Shal, who was supposed to be here. She covered a lot of fieldwork in Northern Africa, but she didn't get a visa on time from Egypt to be here. So that's why I'm here. And again, I want to thank her for all the work that she's done. So just let me state that on the record. Then, yeah, I worked in the past in the European Commission, so perhaps I can sketch a little bit how I see the twin transition, because what I understood from you is that historically the digital transition and the kind of energy green transition were kind of separate, and now they're coming together. And also our president sketched that there's a lot of opportunities for digital technology to help, greening the economy, let's say. But when we talk about framing, I have the impression that this is not the best framing to focus it to portray this as the twin transition, because when we talk about the greening of the economy, it's very clear, right? We want to get carbon neutrality by 2050, not just globally, but also, for instance, at the city level. So there's a very clear objective, and this is something that we have to push because it will not happen on its own. Whereas when we talk about the digital transition, it's kind of a 30, 40, or perhaps even 80-year process, depending on where you pick the starting date. But it's kind of an autonomous process in a certain way. This train is rolling without us actively intervening, and there's a lot of negative side effects as well of that when we talk about energy usage, etc. When we talk about the use of scarce materials. So I would say, for me personally, that the framing is not ideal. I would say that the digital transition is good and useful insofar as it supports a sustainable transition, like a green transition. And I really think that's a big challenge. I mean, I don't know if you heard last week that the biggest crypto trading platform collapsed. Tens of billions, like man-hours, money invested in what's essentially a gambling platform. So right now, a lot of digital infrastructure is kind of invested in ads markets, etc. So it's a huge wasted opportunity. So I think, for me, it's still an open question if we should call this a twin transition or something else, and digital seeing it as a tool for the energy transition, for the green transition. That's, I think, sufficient for opening remarks.
Yeah, that's a very interesting critical aspect of it. So now let's try to dig a little bit deeper on the levers that Reinhilde, you were talking about. In the analysis that you've done on this external dimension of twin transition, what would you say is the relationship between the market-driven approaches and security-driven approaches that the EU adopts? Like, are they mutually reinforcing, or do you think they diverge quite significantly?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think that these two approaches have been like two layers of the same building. And this is clearly a neoliberal building. Because if you look at for example, security concerns, they were almost all related to the protection of property rights, of intellectual property rights, to fight cybercrime, seen as an obstacle for the development of a digital economy. And also they were especially addressed to migration control. And so these two approaches, they are different of course, but they are aiming at the same thing, at the same result. What is really diverging from these two approaches is the new frame, the geopolitical frame, because it is not that compatible with the idea of a bottom-up, private-led, free flow of information. Of course, it can be compatible with it, but at least theoretically, there are some tensions between these approaches. And a clear example is provided by the use in Europe of the concepts strategic autonomy and digital sovereignty. And of course, this is very much different from the idea of a global digital market, and also these concepts are bringing in, and this is maybe the only positive thing, they are bringing back a political rationality in the discussion about the technologies, for example. It's not just a market rationality that has to be a guiding principle, a guiding approach to the digital revolution in this case, but it is bringing back also political considerations. And so it will reshape also the contribution that political parties, trade unions, national and European parliaments, and so on, could provide to imagine a new way, like it was said before, a new way to deal with the twin transition.
So Reinhilde, how do you see this relationship between market and security approaches in the energy markets and the energy policy field?
Well, the energy is a kind of a different story than the digital, as it actually lays at the basis of the EU with the coal and steel community, and actually through that, they thought that through creating a market, it would create peace, and it did so for so many years. But if you then look at outside the EU, it didn't work that well, like we see now with Russia's invasion in Ukraine. Apparently, the market isn't that important anymore when it comes to ideology, and then something else happens. So I think, in a way, the market for the EU has been working for many years, but its external strategy, its market approach isn't working, and that's why it changed towards a more securitized approach. Although I have to say, energy has always been seen as a security approach, because we need energy, otherwise we will have a problem. We won't have lights, we won't have our economy working, we won't have anything working. So it has always been seen as a security approach, because certainly earlier we didn't have any renewable energy. We had to import a lot of our renewable energy from externally often in autocratic states. So we changed actually our approach each time to more securitizing our vision on energy instead of markets each time that something happens externally. Like now with Russia, again, we're securitizing our energy approach. And as I already mentioned, each time we are securitizing, we're in a way forgetting a little bit our norms that we have been putting forward, and our good goals, or stop subsidizing fossil fuels, all those good things that we were envisioning still 1 year ago with the agenda for the Mediterranean. It seems like 1 year later we have forgotten them.
Thank you. And Justin, do you see some overlap then between these digital policies and energy policies approaches, referring to security and market?
Thanks, Kevin, and thanks, Reinhilde and Mauro, for those remarks, because I think I agree with a lot of what you said. Like if you look back like the past 40, 50 years, there's been a shift very recently, I would say, from a market-based approach to something that's a bit more geopolitical, more strategic. I think for energy a bit earlier than for digital, to be honest. I think for digital we're still not really there because nobody really knows what we'll use it for in the end. And I think that is very difficult. It's very important for the EU because, of course, we're now in a different moment, right? The EU, and you mentioned the European community of coal and steel, you know, the 50s, 60s, was a different time. We kind of lived in the shade of, you know, big Cold War, you know, USSR, US competition. And the EU was basically kind of an apolitical process. We were like, via bureaucratic procedures, we were just creating a big internal market, and this was also seen then as the way to create peace, etc. And of course, now we live in a very different time. The EU has to deal with what we can call like hardcore politics, the politics of events, as it's been called, right? Since the migration crisis in 2015, the financial crisis already before that, 2012, now kind of like the big geopolitical restructurations when you look at China, when you look at Ukraine. So something needs to change. We need to become more autonomous, but it's very difficult for the EU to actually do that because if you look at the treaties and like the kind of internalized mentality, it's really, you know, the market will solve stuff for us. And if we just create those rules and this internal space, good things will happen. So it has been a really, I would say, kind of a painful and slow process. Mauro, you mentioned European strategic autonomy, so it is happening. There's talk about strategic autonomy. There's some things happening, for instance, the big EU Chips Act also, where they try to link like market opportunities with the geopolitical considerations. So we try to create our own chips, enlarge our own chips industry in Europe. I'm a bit skeptical about the funding. Those things are always quite opaque in EU politics. So it's like we put 10 billion and somehow we get 80 billion in the end by some leveraging left and right. So let's see about that. But so I think this is very difficult, and you also see that if you look at some really recent initiatives. So after the Corona crisis, we have gotten this huge Corona crisis recovery fund at EU level. So it's hundreds and hundreds of billions to kind of push us towards a green transition and also a digital transition. But the EU can't really make up its mind about the usage of these funds in terms of geopolitics also. So there's very little conditions. In the funds, they say 20% should go to digital, a lot of it should go to sustainable, but there's not really a lot of coordination how this should happen, what kind of technologies we want to invest in, which suppliers we want to work with, to also like, you know, secure the supply chain, etc. So I think this is really a process on the long term for the years to come. And what I also think is kind of problematic, and this was also touched upon by you, Mauro, and you, Reinhilde, is that we also want this to be open. It can't be just a closed approach. We really need to work with Northern African countries in a partnership on this, and that is not really what's happening right now. I think we'll probably touch upon that a little bit later as well. Okay.
So a lot of challenges on the horizon then. Let's now take a look at the enablers that North Africa needs from the EU to take full advantage of the twin transition process. So starting with Mauro, what do you think these enablers are on the digital side, and perhaps hinting at the overlap as well with...
Yes, thank you for the question. As for the digital, our analysis shows that while the European Union is thinking of this twin transition as an opportunity to regain or to gain the role of a global leadership, especially in the digital field, in developing and standardizing new technologies like artificial intelligence, blockchains, the Internet of Things, and so on. North African countries are still struggling with very basic enablers. And our colleagues was not here. Amira has found especially two kind of digital enablers that are still lacking in North Africa. The first one is access to fixed broadband. And especially the problem is the price in relation to the average income of people living there, because it's too high. And so this prevents people from getting into the internet, into digital networks in a proper way. I'm saying in a proper way because the technology matters. The technologies that we promote matters. So it's not the mobile connection that is very widespread in Northern Africa too, but it's fixed broadband. Because if we want that the digital works as an enabler to increase economic performance, competitiveness, and also green policies, we need that people use the proper technology. So I would say less smartphones and more personal computers, very synthetically. And the second problem that Northern African countries are facing is the lack of advanced digital skills. It's not skills just to, for example, using PowerPoint. We do not have these skills, and also, for example, to write on Word. But advanced digital skills are the capacity, for example, to write a computing program. And this is the real enabler that could help Northern African people to grasp the opportunities of a twin transition. And from this point of view, I would say that for states, it's much easier to increase the number of citizens that have a Facebook account or an Instagram account, rather than helping people to write their own codes, to participate in discussion about the infrastructure. Which kind of infrastructure do we want? This is something that progressive actors should engage with, because the technology is not all the same. So our choosing of one kind of technology rather than another have political implication. And this is, I think, the most challenging idea that progressive parties, progressive organizations, entities, and so have to embrace and have to fight about if we want a just twin transition.
And Reinhilde, I imagine that the enablers are very different on the energy side.
Yeah, they're quite different, although many are in a way the same. Of course, like I already said in the beginning, the institutional framework is often lacking in Northern African countries. So if we go there and we have our big projects, but there's nobody there that can that has the regulations in place, that can help financing, that can work on it when something isn't working anymore, then in the end it will fail, and we have seen it in the past. So we need to make sure that there's a workforce. Like you say, we need to invest in skills, first of all, in Northern African countries. People need to have work, need to have skills to work on things for the future, like clean energy technologies. The EU should invest in those things, and that should be the first things they invest in before going there and launching their big projects. Because if you don't have the enablers, those projects will fail in the end. Next to that, I actually think, in a way, currently, it could be an advantage, as you were saying, that in digital they are still lagging behind. Also in energy access, a lot of parts of Northern Africa are still lacking access to clean energy sources. And actually, this could be an advantage, because if we now go for a twin transition, we can actually leapfrog the fossil fuels and go immediately for a right system in those countries. So next to skills, we should leapfrog and use this situation and go for the twin immediately, and not go again for some in-between solution, but just go for it now with the support of the EU. I don't know how much time, because I can keep on talking. Maybe. Yeah.
I think we should keep some time for questions as well. So let's move on. Justin, what do you think we can do to further move in the right direction, based on building on what Reinhilde and Mauro contributed?
Thanks, Kevin. And also thanks, Reinhilde and Mauro. And I agree again with a lot of what you said. I feel very repetitive. I think I agree with Mauro that we need to invest much more in basic infrastructure. So it's concrete connectivity infrastructure that often doesn't exist. I'm not such an expert on energy, so I'm not going to comment on that, but I trust that what you said, I probably agree with that. But I think, and it's something bigger, that we also need to find a new model to cooperate with Northern Africa, because I think the challenge for the EU is that we're kind of squeezed in the middle. We're squeezed on the one hand between what we call like big tech hyperscalers from the US that kind of dominate a lot of our digital infrastructure and push it in certain directions that are not necessarily in our interests. On the other hand, of course, you have the Chinese model, very overtly state-driven, also quite ruthlessly centralized. And I think the EU has some vague ideas about doing things differently, but it's not consistently following this approach. So the EU should really champion an idea of, well, let's say, open source digital architectures that other people, other countries can buy into, that make sure that value created locally is also kept locally. It's a different approach, and the EU is like nominally following it under its normal, what is called open strategic autonomy. But in practice, it's not really the case. This is also covered in the paper, where you talk about the liberalization of telecoms markets that the EU pushed in Northern Africa just to expand its own markets, etc. But I think there's a genuine opportunity for cooperation. But this will really require also different institutions, because the EU cannot really at the moment champion this model because we don't control our own digital infrastructure. We don't. So if you talk about using the digital transition for a climate transition, of a green transition, like we don't own that computational infrastructure that we would need to capture, to measure, say, carbon impacts or something like that, which would be the infrastructural basis for, say, a carbon tax. We don't do that. We don't control that. Also, when we legislate, we don't take that into account. So all the big digital legislation of the past years, the Digital Services Act, Digital Markets Act, the AI Act that's coming up, that's perhaps very niche, I don't know, but sustainability is never mentioned. That's not a concern, and we don't control technology, so we can't make that transition. So I think it's also an internal problem. So we should push for that new type of infrastructure that can be, that doesn't mean that the government should own, say, Google or whatever, but it does mean that we should create some logical interface, a logical layer, that we need to create protocols, standards, that we need to explain how we can measure, I don't know, carbon impacts, for instance, and that we control that interface on which other people can build applications to kind of push towards this green transition. And I think if you have that, then you can also easily expand that on an equal basis with Northern African partners, and then you can do something good together, but we're not there yet.
Thanks, Justin. So now for our last big question, and bouncing back on that, how far do you think that this twinning process can go on green and digital policies in the EU's foreign policy specifically, as opposed to the internal market? And is it desirable for the process to go further? Can the development of digital infrastructure be considered green? Under what conditions? Because we see an efflorescence of policy initiatives in this domain, but do we really have the institutional setup that goes with it and that is ready to fulfill these objectives? So maybe, Justin, you can continue on this before yielding the floor to Reinhilde.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. I think it's kind of, it links up with what I just said. So I think right now, we don't have the space to really deepen like the transition in our external cooperation with, for instance, Northern African countries, because we don't have things in order at home. So we don't control the infrastructure. So I think we need to think about how to do that, because right now, climate change is a global problem, and we need to fix that together. There's also a global computational infrastructure. We just use it for social media and ads and that type of stuff. If we want to kind of change tech and build that to do climate sensing, to capture carbon emissions, to track business processes and see how they can run more climate friendly, climate neutral, etc., that will require a change in governance, and that will require new institutions. We have other papers in the making where we go into detail about what institutions that will require, so stay tuned. But I think I stop there. But just perhaps one comment. You need to think about publicly funded applications, because right now, if you leave everything to the market, what often happens is that things are siloed. So Apple has an interest to keep its apps, to force all its apps to just work with its own infrastructure, and that's the same for other type of firms. Not always, but as a general tendency, I would say that the digital economy is becoming siloed. You need to use multiple different applications that don't interoperate, that don't talk to each other. And if, for instance, you really want to go to a green transition, you really want to have the infrastructure in place, you need to have some kind of interoperable structure, and that is par excellence something that should be publicly built. So I think that would be one start. That's very modest, but it's a start. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. It was very interesting to hear you talking about that, because like you said, you didn't know that much about energy. For me, that's the same for digital, so I'm learning a lot too. So what I think should be done is actually, like I already said, the institutional setup, certainly in our neighborhood, should be first present. But I think we need the twinning digital transition in our neighborhood. So we can't doubt about that. It should be in our foreign policy as well, because as I already said, we need to leapfrog. And although I know it's a difficult one, digital and green, because I already know, like, even where I work, it's difficult. We all have our different pillars and we don't talk about each other. We're all in our corner just doing our work, and the one next to us is maybe doing something that could be interesting for us, but we don't talk enough to each other to know it. So it's everywhere like that. But still, I think it's needed, because we need a system change. We need a transformation, like I already said. So we also need it in our foreign policy, and we need to help Northern Africa, and it's also in our own good. If we look at it in a selfish way, it's also good for us. All those issues that we have had, that Northern African people have had in their countries, it would also be good for them. For example, I remember that Amira said that people aren't interested that much in climate change in Northern Africa. And then I think if you would invest in the workforce, in clean energy technologies that they can work on, that they can build in their local communities and their cities, then they probably will be interested. They will be more involved, and they will be more interested in the end. And I really believe it will be difficult, but we will have to find the right framework, and we will have to do it.
Thank you. Mauro, then, so what do you see on the digital side for this? Do you agree with Reinhilde and Justin, or are there any points that you would nuance?
No, yeah, I agree, and especially with Justin when he said that we do not have currently the institutional setting able to do this kind of transitions, this kind of twin transitions. But we could think of the twin transition as also as a standard in the Latin meaning of the word, that is like a flag that we are following, something that we are going through. And that could be good at under three conditions that are both conditions of desirability and also conditions for the success of the project. The first one is a higher level cooperation with our North African partners. We have to get rid of previous approaches, just considering policy transfer, funds transfer towards them, and we need co-ownership, co-design of policies and co-design of technologies too, and also value sharing. That is the most difficult thing, as our policy study shows. And the second condition is that it has not to be a double transition, but it has to be a real twin transition. From the digital point of view, I say this because I think that, of course, we know that the digital technologies could provide useful tools for the green transition, but it has to happen also the other way around. I mean, we have to green the digital technologies. So the condition is that we start to redesign our devices in order to put them into a cycle of a circular economy. We need to think about low-emission telecommunication infrastructures. We need to start to build new data centers that are powered by clean energy and so on. So there are a lot of things that the green approach could provide to improve the digital policies. And the third condition, I think, is the most important one, because it is an obstacle now, but it could become an enabler, is that the European Union have not to recount its own values. Because there is the temptation to do that. We are facing a crisis about energy and so on, so we could start to think, okay, we need energy, we do not care about where it is coming and so on. And the same goes for the digital. But at the same time, no grand project, no long-term project could be successful if we start to deny our own identity. Because our partners will not recognize us anymore, and this could create a lot of ambiguities, and so the project is deemed to the failure. And this means that we need not only to greening the digital technologies, but also to democratize digital technologies. Because when we are writing, we as Europeans are writing our digital projects, and we are often used to say that it is to increase the reach of democracy, to improve popular participation and engagement and so on. But we have to prove it since the designing process of the technology. So we need to provide the world with a new model of technology that is not just a private-led model of the Californian model, and it's not the hegemonic state model that is coming from China. We have the culture, we have also the, let's say, the imagination. We need more funds, of course, but we have the ideas about how we want to have a just twin transition.
Thank you. So we have a good call for openness, integrity, and more democratization in this grand project ahead of us. So now I'm going to open the floor to questions. Do we have questions from the audience?
My good friend, the director of the Campalans, to have this initiative. That's here, yeah, like that. Okay, so let me just put some questions that you can give me some explanation, of course, not all of you, you just choose. First of all, are we in time? Are we really in time? Because for 2030, I don't see the time. I see the wish. I see the meetings. I see a lot of will, but the time, it's the day after tomorrow. So that's the first thing. The second thing is 2050. Well, perhaps, but you know that China and India are saying no. 2060 or 2070. You have been contamination the world for the whole time. Now let us survive. Let us grow. Let us do our way. That's the first question. Second, I mean, I think to talk about green revolution and technological revolution is very smart. And now the twins transition, I have twins too. The twins transition is wonderful. The green one, the digital one, well, but the question for me is, where is the program? With the calendar. What are we going to do from now to the next 5 years? And from the 5 to the 10, and for the 5 to the 15? And how much is going to cost it? And who's going to pay for it? I am a militant, but I am a little bit entrepreneur. So the wishes must follow for who's paying, how much it costs, etc. That's the second thing. How to do it? That's the third thing. How to do it? You know, you have clear that it's more expensive to do electric cars than the normal cars. Why? Because we need a lot of materials that are rare and very expensive. Who's going? First of all, where are we going to find them? And second, who's going to pay for it? You know where are they? They are in Afghanistan. Because for the last 50 years, the Afghans just do the war between them and do not exploit anything. But this is going to be taken by China through the road here going from Pakistan and a small link to Kabul. So that's the third. And then the rest, they call it, we call it tierras raras, rare earth. These sort of things that I never know. It is rare because of the names, or it is rare because they are not enough. Scandio, litio, tullio, lantano, lutecio, cerio, 17. So, and the last one is, the reality is the last summit. The last summit, the conclusion are in the half of the way, or maybe 25% of the way. So this is the reality. So how are we going to do it? At least, you know, some of the things I always say, be modest, but do it.
Thank you for that. I think everyone on the panel here agrees that it's really an emergency to act and not just talk. But that's also why we have very, very good recommendations in the study on how to move forward. And of course, there's disappointment and disillusion with the global cooperation, and it's very difficult with climate justice, which is also why the next panel is going to be very important, because looking at the local level and concrete action on the local level is essential as well. But we need to explore all the avenues forward to move as fast as possible. Mauro, perhaps you have a response on the critical resources
yes,
aspect
I think
of the question?
just one word there. I think the most of these questions go to Reinhilde. And just about the terre rare, no? And who is paying for the digital transition? Well, in the history of the digital technologies, the most of the investments that have been productive, successful in creating the information society comes from the public, even in the United States. So the question is not who is paying like there's some extra to be paid. It's how do we pay what we are already paying? For what are we paying? For technologies that are energy consuming or that are relying on materials that are extracted by children in Africa, for example? Here is the space for political action, I think, in directing what we are doing. But I do not think that there is an extra, at least for the digital technology, an extra to be paid. So it's just an extra of engagement by actors that for a long time have been excluded by the fora where the codes, the architectures, the way that technologies work have been decided. So now something is changing, and so the hope is this, that we can spend the same amount of money, public amount of money, to change something, to change architecture, to change devices, to use something that is not implied with exploitation of children labor, for example, or with the pollution of our world. But I think that most of the questions are for Reinhilde.
Please, Reinhilde, if you have any comments.
Well, I think in the end, it's true that the citizens pay. If it's through taxes or to anything, it's rather the way your money is spent. That is important. It's true, like after COVID or during COVID, I really thought things would change and would change in a good way, because it's not often enough said that doing nothing will cost so much more than acting now. And it's true, now it will be difficult and it will cost a lot, but not doing anything will cost a lot more. And it's always like, no, but it will cost today a lot. Yeah, I know, but tomorrow, if we don't do something today, tomorrow it will be more. And if we had done something 10 years ago, it would cost less. So we have to act. That's simple. And it's true, we need a clear timeline and a program. And like the study we did was about, with the Green Deal, I had the impression that something clearly came and we were going in a new direction. We even have a target that is put forward in law. I mean, it's in law. We have to do it. And maybe we should go for such a target in more countries and more globally. That is the target that is put forward in law that we have to oblige to. And what I further still wanted to say about the rare earths, and what I wanted to say, I have to finish my story. What I wanted to say about our study is that the new commission has only been there from 2019. Then there was COVID. Then they had the 2021 new agenda for the Southern Mediterranean, and then there was Ukraine. And that's what you mentioned. They are actually living from crisis to crisis to crisis. So I think it's very difficult for the Commission to put forward a path and holding on to that path, because all of the member states have to agree on that path. And I think it's very difficult for the Commission to have a clear path, unfortunately, because often they propose something, but then there comes a crisis in between and they have to change their path. And about the rare earths, they aren't actually rare. Rare is because they say rare because they aren't extracted currently at a lot of places. But they could be extracted at more places, but it's polluting. And not a lot of citizens accept such a polluting practice in their backyard, and I agree, and I think the way to go is recycle. And then the rare earths won't be that rare anymore. Okay.
Thank you, Reinhilde. We'll take one more question.
Hola, buenas. Bueno, yo lo haré en
Well, I'm going to speak Spanish. And those of you, okay, I have different questions. First, I agree with Reinhilde. Those who will be paying all of the funding, all of the cost of that digital and ecological transformation, I mean, at the end of the day, the only thing I see nowadays is that it is being paid by the taxpayer. Average middle-income families who do not have enough income to buy an electrical car or to have a solar plate. Maybe I'm being a bit populist, and I do not agree with the Ukrainian war, but the EU 10 days ago decided to spend 1.4 billion euro a month in the Ukrainian war. But we are 700 million people in Europe, and maybe 1 million per person. We could all be green tomorrow. I know I'm being very populist, but, well, now, with North African countries, I understand that we must have that co-ownership. For example, they have land and sunshine. Maybe that land and that sunshine imply that we could actually have some solar panels that benefit them, that benefit us, that should generate work and education in those countries in exchange for that energy that will come from us. And given that we are dependent on Russia, well, we see the problems that's generating. And then on the other hand, if we bet on recycling, and I agree with that, and we have technological or electrical products, well, deadline, I mean, obsolescence. I mean, my mobile phone should not collapse, but you know, we have obsolescences that should be forbidden. Maybe we could reach the year 2030 with all of the greenhouses, but it should not be middle income or average, middle class families that have not enough revenues to pay for all of it. And if Europe's plan is, okay, I'm going to give you the money for you to put up that solar panel. No, you just put the money, and I'm going to give you 10% for that solar panel. I'm never going to do it, not because I do not want to, but because I cannot. Right. I'm going to speak Spanish too. I think all of your thoughts are very interesting. We have to bear them in mind. And the work carried out by researchers is crucial to try and foresee the future. Yes. But Solanilla has given us a crucial sign, a crucial signal. He has said that this transition is carried out in small-sized, middle-sized or large-sized cities, or it will not possible. And I think it's very important that he started with the middle-sized and small-sized cities, because last week I was in the Smart City Congress, and one of the conclusions I drew is that smart city is for large cities in the world exclusively. The rest, well, they make projects, proximity projects, etc. But smart city does not reach. It only reaches large cities. In Catalonia, well, given that it was held here, it's either middle-sized cities that will carry out the change, or there will be no change. No matter how much Barcelona could lead the world, it's all the same. So, sorry, I have to read my notes. I think we need to include a crucial aspect, methodology. We need methodology. It's not enough to just think what needs to be done, but you have to tell Figueres, a small-sized town in Catalonia, how it should carry out that transition in that region, and all small-sized and middle-sized cities. And if we do not do that, the rest, I mean, the funds are fine, the European funds that tell cities, okay, you do this and I'll pay you that. But if we do not follow a methodology, if cities do not know how to carry out a transition, they will never do it. They will never do it. Thank you.
We're also running out of time.
A ver,
Well, I have been Secretary General of a network of Mediterranean cities since 1995 until 2015. Exequis, it was called. And I'm sorry there is nobody here from the south. I think that's a big mistake we have made. I believe that all of this time we've been doing things trying to be aligned with trying to democratize cities, give technology, give them power. We use a city-based strategy as something important. There have been cities like Sousse in Tunisia that used technology to develop a good strategy using social media, very much social media. There have been cities that, with regards to other issues, they have tried to use technology, and in a lot of them that failed for something I'd like to say, and that we should bear in mind, which is that the evolution of the southern shore of the Mediterranean is getting worse by the day. I mean, cities are growing chaotically with the old South American model, as opposed, I mean, not with a European model. Growth is ever more unbalanced. And for example, we introduce an easy model, the model of a call center to control the management of waste in Alexandria, not through city council employees paid by the American aid, they paid 300, but by the very same citizens who say, well, I do not have my container, and there is an oil problem here, and that for 2 years, and we have tried to do it in Tripoli and in Morocco, and the engineering companies won. The growth of cities with European capital is done to go backwards with regards to energy saving, because they are following a model, and I'm not talking about Egypt, but I'm talking about other countries, cities outside for middle or high class people. They go and live outside of the city, and the rest stay in the city. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Ladies and gentlemen, what we're discussing here is fine. Both the program, I liked it, and what Mr. Solanilla and what Mrs. Rodrigues have said, they are politically correct, but what to do? What to do in practice is what's truly difficult. I would say that the EU, it's going to be very hard to change the EU. Because since the conference in Barcelona back in 1995, we have some clear goals. Our money is being used to increase the market. Ladies and gentlemen, may God help us, and let's try and be lucky with regards to these battles.
It's very good and interesting, and will deserve an entire new panel. But they are saying us that we have to finish. So I will just pick up just one point. That is, for example, we have in the European Union, we have a directive about the electronic waste, but it is completely disattended. And according to the latest reports, all the member states, almost all the member states, are not even collecting information about how do we recycle technological devices and so on. So maybe a regulation is better because it comes with enforcement, with fines and so on. But of course, there are a lot of challenges on the path towards a just twin transition. I mean, the train is delivered. It is running towards the twin transition. The only option is to have a more just twin transition or a very bad twin transition. So I think that we have no other option on the table. Thank you.
Okay, I think we'll have to stop here to make space for the other panel as well. But I invite you to also talk to the panelists during the coffee break if you want to pursue the discussions further. I'd like to very warmly thank all of them, and also Amira El-Shal from Cairo University, who participated in writing the policy study, which you can find on the FEPS website. So thank you for participating in today's panel, and I hope that we can have a very fulfilling next panel as well. Thank you.
And perhaps just to announce that we discussed many problems in our panel, but for the solutions, we have the second panel on the POW.
Also, a reminder to register on the table out front if you haven't done this yet.
Bueno, continuamos.
Okay, so we shall continue with the second panel, which will be in Spanish. The first one was in English, and the second one will be in Spanish, since the speakers are Spanish speakers. And in these 50 minutes that we have, we shall try to land on all of these or some of these ideas that we've discussed on the field, those who are in the field, in the territory. And we are going to do so with three wonderful speakers. And I would like to thank them so much for participating and for their time. The first one is Laia Bonet, Deputy Mayor of Barcelona, one of the deputy mayors of the Barcelona Town Council. Even if we don't believe it, COVID is still here and she wasn't able to make it. Thank you. Good afternoon, Laia. Good afternoon. I'm so sorry that I cannot be there because I was particularly excited about this session and I wanted to share that empty chair. It would have been a pleasure. Thank you. But we will pick your brain. Don't worry. We will pick your brain in the few minutes that you'll be with us. Then to my left, Aleksandr Ivancic, with a long experience in institutions and as a consultant. He is senior consultant of Aiguasol, researcher at ITEC, with broad experience on energy, which I think is one of the critical factors of this double transition. Good afternoon and thank you. And to my right, Mireia Belil. She is director of Bora consultancy firm, an international consultant with a long track record in Barcelona, both in the town council and in large events, in one of them as director of the foundation of the Forum of Cultures, which was one of the great events, one of the great transformative events in Barcelona. And we will ask her to contribute some ideas about, well, interesting things that are taking place in the world. Good afternoon, Mireia. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. Well, we will start this panel. And before I pass the floor over to you, and I ask you questions, well, I know Laia, of course, was not here during the first part of the meeting, but I will now summarize some of the questions and comments from the previous panel, because I think that some of the answers can be actually given during this panel. We talk about things like, is the timeline that we have realistic? The ambitious goals that we have, can we apply them with the current timeline from now to 2030? And solutions must come from large cities, or mid to small towns the ones that need to be used as a lab, as a test bench? How do we articulate big with small? And how do we make it possible to cooperate also amongst cities, territories? We talked about the North of Africa, but there are others. Laia Bonet has responsibilities in the cities networks. So, well, some of these questions I think can be answered during the panel. And if you'll allow me, I would start with Laia Bonet, because I think that, well, I work at the Barcelona Town Council and I love Barcelona, and as I said at the beginning, Barcelona is a great lab. It's an innovative city. And I think in Barcelona there are some clues as to the things that are being done that can be replicable and scalable in other places in the world. I think, Laia, that the policy that you are leading in Barcelona, linked to the fact that the digital transition has a positive impact, has a vector of sustainability, a fight against climate change, which I think is really interesting. So I would invite you to this first round. What are you doing in Barcelona that can be replicable elsewhere in other European cities? Thank you, Pau. And, well, I think the question really fits me because it is unquestionable that sustainability has an environmental dimension, but allow me to say that it also has a social dimension. And I think it is key to understand that because digitalization of all of the municipal structure mustn't only take into account polluting emissions, to put it plainly, but also social inequalities it may amplify. This is actually the concept of sustainability that is made very explicit in the 2030 agenda when we talk about environmental sustainability, social sustainability, and economic sustainability. So the sustainability of economic policies that may be provided as an answer to those challenges, to the need to face the struggle against inequality on the one hand and the climate emergency on the other hand. And in order to make headway in digitalization, in the social transition, I think town councils must guarantee that the relationship between the administration and the citizens cannot take place only via digital channels. It doesn't matter the way in which you address the administration. The digital administration cannot replace in-person channels or phone channels as a whole, because then we would be making it very difficult for the most affected collectives by the digital divide to digital services. We have the ICT agents of the town council. We started this project during the toughest months of the lockdown and the pandemic. And basically what we did was to facilitate arrangements that could not be done in person while we did this digitally with the help of staff from town council, ICT agents. And maybe later we can stop to talk a bit more about these examples, but basically just to give you a couple of headlines about social sustainability and about environmental sustainability. Well, in order to make strides, it's important that if we talk about environmental sustainability and digitalization, what we need are deep, profound changes in the administrative culture. Right now, digital and environmental policies do not communicate, barely communicate. We continue to work as if they were completely separate, when the truth is that they are deeply related. We need to organize work teams in a different manner to make sure that the digital infrastructure contributes to the improvement of environmental policies, and also that the development of digital technologies incorporates environmental sustainability criteria, so reusing infrastructures, energy efficiency systems, and many others. Basically, to give you a starting framework for what you were asking about, and maybe later I can tell you a few initiatives that we carried out, or shall I do so now, Pau? I think it would be nice for you to give us a brief overview now. Okay. I think there are examples of digital technologies that, of course, contribute to the implementation of measures oriented towards reducing polluting emissions and sustainability. The digital infrastructure, in the end, is a lever for better sustainability policies. Just a couple of examples to land this. One example of digital technology for planning: the digital twins. Digital twins will allow us to make simulations of policies and urban interventions before implementing them. We will be able to anticipate their effects. So this allows us to correct before implementation and to guarantee results. This is what we're working on jointly with the Barcelona Supercomputing Center to create a digital twin of Barcelona, a replica of Barcelona in the digital format, on top of which, with all of the data, we will be able to introduce all of the policies that we've designed to transform the city, and we'll be able to test them, to test out the impacts they will generate before implementation, in such a way that, as I said, we can make corrections, make adjustments. If there are collateral effects that we had not anticipated, we can correct them in advance. We know that correcting policies after decided upon, voted upon, and implemented is sometimes difficult. So let's make use of the available technology to be able to test them before we implement them, and to make sure that when we implement them, we will get the results that we actually aimed at with that policy. And another example of digital technology, in this case, not for planning, but for implementation directly, which is a very clear example, the cameras of the low emissions zone, which identify vehicles, the type of label in the vehicles accessing the low emissions zone in Barcelona. You know that it is inside of the rondas, the ring roads around the city, and these labels authorize them to circulate. The cameras check the label, they cross-reference this with the list of vehicles, and if this vehicle cannot access the zone, then the adequate sanction will be processed. Just two examples, just to give you two very specific examples. Thank you very much, Laia. I think you mentioned two things that are essential. The first one is removing barriers. Digital policies and environmental policies need to communicate more and better. And I think this is a big challenge. And the second one is innovation. We talked earlier about the innovation, the city as a test bench. And I think digital twins is one more example of innovation, of how technology applied to sustainability in cities can lead to new tools. And in the city, if there is one critical factor, is that of energy. Energy is one of the critical factors for development, and at the same time, cities are energy predators. And if there is one place in which technology should have a positive impact, to use them in a rational and efficient manner, this is in the cities. And Aleksandr, I think, has a lot of experience too, and can give us some ideas as to what path should we take in this twin transition. Thank you, Pau. I would like to start by being a bit controversial, otherwise it will get boring. I think if we want to talk about this twin transition, or synchronized, coordinated transition, we would need to compare these two transitions, these two desired transitions a little bit, and understand whether they are truly compatible or not. Because I get the feeling that we are saying, yes, this is wonderful, they come together, but if we have not analyzed it and proven that this is the case, I think it's storytelling rather than real policies. So first of all, I think it is very important to consider that these two transitions are planned. And vis-à-vis the energy transition, it's not the first one in history. We've had several, but it is the first planned one. The first one that attempts to solve a challenge with a capital C, and this is why it has been planned. And it is an end in and of itself. The energy transition is an end in and of itself. The digital transition is not. It's a mean, it's a lever, as Laia just said. It is a facilitating technology for energy, but for many other areas as well. So there's an interesting difference. Secondly, energy transitions normally last between 30 and 50 years, or at least the previous one. Let's imagine that we can accelerate this one, that we can take it on in 20 years. We are the best. How will digital technology change in 20 years? The Forum of Cultures was organized 20 years ago? How were our phones back then, the data centers we had back then? How much has the world changed? So the factor of time and dynamic of these two changes is huge, and I think we need to bear this into account if we want to think that these two go together. On the other hand, the digital transition is a transition led by the market. Current capitalism, the current market, will undergo a digital transition. So from Europe, from policies, whether we do something or not, this transition will happen. Will it be fair, unfair, humane, inhumane? We don't know, but it will happen. However, the energy transition will not happen. If we do not lead it the way we want to lead it, it will not happen, because it's the first time in history where we're going from energy sources of greater density, energy intensity, to sources of energy of lower density, which are renewables. So this is a civilizing challenge. But digitalization is a trend. And between challenge and trend, there is, at least the way I see it, an abyss. And in terms of, well, digitalization, the more we digitalize, the more energy we need. So we need to think about how we solve this. Otherwise, we will be like the turtle and the rabbit our entire lives. And for the energy transition, we need three things: technology, economy, and society. We've talked at length about technology today. Almost everything we've said has ended with a comment about technology. But now we have more technology than we can implement, than we can consume and digest. With the current energy prices, the transition, the implementation of efficiency measures is not feasible. It is feasible. It doesn't matter who pays. It's sustainable, economically speaking. But the challenge is social. It's a social one. We need to change things, starting from citizens, legislators, and policymakers. Because I think, and now I'm going back to the local sphere, which is our topic, we have not understood the value chain, the political legislative value chain. In business, there is a very clear thing, which is value chain. The most successful companies are the ones that have vertical integration, and we have not managed to do integration, going from European policies to national policies to laws that lead us to action and to projects on site. So we are honestly doing poorly, I should say, because what good is it that in 2016 Europe said first citizens, then food, then energy in the value chain, when I cannot develop an energy community? When we are in a neighborhood such as Poplano here, I cannot create an energy community with my neighbor. So what are we playing at? I'm sorry. No, perfect, Aleksandr. I think that you were shaking interesting things, and I would like to stress your perspective of energy transitions, which, as you said, are long, 25, 30 years, but we have the need, the pressing need to accelerate it. And I think the concept of value chains and public policies is very interesting, from European to local. I think this is very interesting. And Mireia, well, we know each other very well, and Mireia is one of those people who, when you meet with her, to talk to her, she has a non-Eurocentric perspective. Europeans normally gaze at our neighbors, and we believe we are the center of the world. And just like we did 20 years ago with the forum, we try to imagine a better world. And Mireia will tell us whether the world is better than 20 years ago or not. But Mireia always says, look, in Cape Town they're doing this, in Korea there's a very interesting experience, in Mexico. So Mireia is an explorer of cities in the world. And this is why we were interested in inviting them, so that she can contribute a non-Eurocentric perspective as to how to approach this twin transition. So Mireia, the floor is yours. I don't know whether my answers will be as brilliant as what Pau said about me, but what I would like to say is that the twin transition, for me, sounds more like marketing than actual criticism, because there's no clear roadmap, first. Secondly, because we have what we call blind spots, which are not tackled. So where are these minerals extracted? Where do they come from? Europe is conducting a cooperation policy in these territories that are already environmentally stressed at the moment. And we are, in a way, trying to show the value of and analyze and monitor the entire value chain of supply of resources and green technologies and resources. I think that's something that is still missing, and we say time and again that we will have solar panels, but these solar panels need resources that are not ours, and we are switching one dependency for another because some countries extract the materials, but a very clear one processes and exports them. So I think cities within this big world and this geopolitics have had, for a long time now, sustainability agendas. The agenda of sustainability is not something new that we have invented, that we invented a few years ago. And there have been different initiatives at the United Nations which have carried out sustainability agendas, from the MDGs, the SDGs, to the current goals, the urban agenda, or the global compact. So I wanted to give you an example of outside of Europe, a city which is normally not considered very advanced, or well, maybe yes, but not as much as ours, which is Cape Town. Cape Town took the initiative in 2001, so more than 20 years ago, of launching what they called the Integrated Metropolitan Environmental Policy. So I would like to stress it was a metropolitan one, and Europeans are a bit lagging behind in that. I believe this is important. And the second topic is that this policy was not a list of sustainability processes, but a change in the way of doing things by local authorities in Cape Town. And this is what's important, the way in which we work, placing innovation and creativity at the center of public policies. And something was done there, which was the mayor's portfolio on urban sustainability, which was under direct leadership of the mayor, and which tried to include sustainability principles in all operations of the city, be they social, urban, economic, and the other way around as well. Everything that was green projects involved or included the side of social opportunities, green jobs, awareness raising. So the success of that strategy was basically in that they worked outside of the silos that Laia talked about, or that we talked about in the previous session. So what we used to call cross-sectionality in some period of public policies, and then we forgot about, but we still need it. So what has this done? It has meant that Cape Town has become the hub of green technology for all of South Africa. And from there on out, they help companies that repair, do maintenance, produce. They assist research centers. So what are the successes of this cocktail? A change in the system and the processes of the organization. This is very important. Partnership with public officers of different levels. Cities need to start talking to other levels of governance and establish agreements with them. Alliances amongst different agents, and proactive contribution to the development of the entire country from the city. I think this was an important element to receive the support of governments. So this is a topic, well, it's a big city, is not large region famous, but it's a part of it. And I wanted to present one in which we're going to the other end of the world, Lancaster, California. California is the center of technological capitalism, eco-industry, defense industry, and entertainment industry. So I think it doesn't get more capitalist than that. So Lancaster is the capital of a county, Antelope Valley, which is a 1-hour drive from the center of Los Angeles, which is working class and semi-rural. Lancaster, well, this county, I think it is, this county has become the first county in the US with its public transportation system entirely electric. It started in 2016. Who was president in 2016? Well, they started back then. They started repurposing the fleet of public transportation. They created a solar farm to recharge the vehicles, and then they convinced a local company to produce buses by signing what they called the community agreement, by which the company hired 40% of its staff, which is about 450 people. They were hired from unemployed programs, and they created a learning program to become an industrial mechanic. And all of that reduced emissions, it reduced operational costs, and with that, new services were created, such as the dial to ride, to get door-to-door services for people who don't have a car in California. So we're talking about a socioeconomic level that means that they cannot buy a Tesla. So how was all of this possible? There was something behind all of this, which was the California Act, which is called, let me find it, Innovative Clean Transit Rule, which, well, the state of California, what they did was to promote that no one could buy a bus or a school bus or a garbage truck with energy other than renewable as from 2029. Same thing here again. The political will of the transit authority, collective intelligence of the community, leadership of the county manager, a supra-local regulation, and a series of very strict pieces of knowledge and very deep knowledge about local reality. And I think that is one of the great advantages of cities, the knowledge they have of their own local context, and that they have to continue promoting. For example, digital twins is a very good idea to contribute more and more knowledge. I think to start with, we've been to 2 corners of the world. As you've seen, she is an explorer of the world. And I wanted to go back to Laia, because in the end, when someone is responsible for governing, they face daily problems and obstacles, budgets, data, policies. And I think that Laia can illustrate how we can go away from this nice storytelling of the twin transition. What are the problems we face? We have 70 minutes, so I'm just asking you the other questions in case you want to start talking about those as well. You have responsibility on sustainable mobility in the city, so this is probably, well, you can give us good examples of the obstacles that you face on a daily basis. Yes, I think, well, the obstacles we face are many. You mentioned them. Actually, I think when we talk about policies linked to the twin transition, as we call it, well, for example, having adequate data is a challenge. Just to put it mildly, having enough budget would be the second one, and tackling challenges in a cross-sectional manner when there is an administrative culture of separate containers is the third one, clearly. And I'm not listing them in order of importance. As to data, It's obvious that Barcelona has a network of sensors that is good. They allow us to collect data, and this has helped us to have a decent amount of mobility data, but it's not enough so as to measure in depth, for example, air quality or moving of people, or all of these in a large scale. We need a lot more data than we have. And an important proportion of these data, of course, pose a problem that goes beyond. It is not enough for us to collect data. The data that we have in town council are not enough. A great deal of those belong to the Catalan government, so the availability of data, I think, is undoubtedly one of the big questions that we need to work on a lot more. The budget that I mentioned is the second obstacle. The deployment of the technological infrastructure is always very costly. It is so for all administrations, and for a town council even more so. Even more so with the size of Barcelona, and the implementation of the network of sensors to get real-time data, for example, of a great part of the city would cost several million euros, and we do not have that budget available to us. Maintenance is expensive too, and in this sense it is obvious that the technological dimension of twin transition policies require an availability of budget, which in the current context is difficult to take on by a local administration, even one of the size of Barcelona. And cross-sectional, that's not a minor issue, because the current setup of the local administration means that digital policies and green transition policies do not always strive for synergies. They work as watertight compartments that only talk to one another when big efforts are made for the purpose. So there's a challenge there also in order to rethink the way in we connect and we organize public policies to be able to give a joint answer to the challenges that we have in terms of air quality, reduction of pollution, sustainable mobility, green spaces. But if you'll allow me, Pau, I wouldn't want to forget about one of the challenges that we have, and that to me, even if they always come from a first step, which is positive, well, in the end, you're left with this bittersweet taste in your mouth, because a great deal of the projects that we managed to develop, even with all of these obstacles that I was telling you about, and that are in that cross-section between digital policies and green transition policies, have been funded thanks to budgets devoted to urban innovation. Some of them come directly from the municipal budget, whereas others, for others, we've gotten even European funds. But at any rate, these are one-off projects and a budget that starts and ends in a pilot plan. So it's difficult, very difficult, to imagine the escalation of these projects onto more structural policies, which would probably be the only way of starting to provide answers to the true challenges, whatever challenges, in this case, those of the green transition, the twin transitions, but any challenge in the end. Because we cannot do so with the current budget. We need for the European Commission and its programs of urban financing stop seeing cities simply as spaces only adequate for innovation, because we have deep challenges that, well, town councils have to face with whatever we have. And European projects with European funds are, of course, very welcome, but when they are proven to be effective, they should receive more funding to escalate them. What we say actually is that the current system de-incentivates local institutions and research centers from participating in European projects that require a lot of time, energy, and human resources for a very limited impact in time. So in the end, and allow me to say this as one more challenge or obstacle, we need to be able to reform the funds that we have access to in town councils to be able to guarantee the economic sustainability of digital innovation and urban innovation projects, that have proven to be successful, but that we then do not have the resources to implement as structural policies. Thank you very much, Laia. And since the president of the foundation is here, I think there's a clear demand here, the need to have more decisiveness from Brussels in supporting these projects that Laia said have proven to be innovative, efficient, and that need a budget to make them scalable and for them to have a positive impact. Aleksandr, I think earlier there was an interesting question about whether this twin transition or the quick wins that we may get in this twin transition, whether these are possible in large cities or in mid to small towns. You are a specialist in energy governance, so where should we focus on? Everywhere at the same time? Shall we start with mid-sized towns, large cities? Well, it's $1 million question. I think we have to do it at the same time in many different places, but I think that the ones in a better place, or the ones that would probably have quick wins, are mid to small towns or islands, such as a specific case of very limited territories. Why am I saying this? Well, in the end, the needs are similar in many areas. Obviously, in mobility and transportation, there are different needs, but other types of energy consumptions, probably in our environment, our climate, are similar, probably. But the advantage that I see for modest-sized locations is precisely on the social side of things, because I think that the social bonds and the social networks, not the social media, this is the digital networks, no, the social networks, good old-fashioned social networks, there is where trust resides. Because in order to make strides in the digital sphere, as I said, the Clean Energy Package of 2016 says the citizen at the center. If we believe that, and if we really want to go that way, the citizens should start being an active part of the energy systems and value chains. Not only a receiver, a customer, a consumer, but a prosumer and a stakeholder who decides, who makes decisions. So in order to do all of that, digitalization is very important. Energy technologies are as well. They are becoming increasingly flexible, smaller, more modular, so more applicable to small scales, and they can be escalated also if needed. But then we still have this social factor, and I believe that here we have a very interesting opportunity in the cities that have not gotten rid of their marketing or trade cooperatives that we had in all villages 100 years ago, and now we have in 4 villages. All the water supply cooperatives, the cultural institutions. Well, of course, there are cultural institutions in Barcelona, but in small towns, everyone, I mean, you connect to hubs and you are connected to everyone. So this traditional social network is a big advantage. And I think there's a lot going on in that way. And I'm a strong believer in local energy communities. And I think this is a new role facilitated by European directives. In Spain, we are still transposing late and partially, as happens with so many other directives. So we are waiting to see how the transposition takes place and how mechanisms are put into place to work not by improvising and not by waiting for the regulation to come through, but by trying to do things right. At the moment, there are some 300, 400 initiatives of local energy communities in Spain, local ones, but they are all initiatives, and only 10% have become a reality because the regulatory framework is hindering us, is stopping us. And in Europe, there's a lot of talk about not public-private partnership, but public-citizen or public-social partnership. And I see that in other countries, there are mechanisms that facilitate this type of collaboration. But in Spain, we are improvising. We are looking for loopholes in the law of local bodies to try and find ways of collaborating and working. And well, it's not tricks, but it's like legal loopholes to be able to do these things. Why can we not have a law that regulates this type of cooperation? Why is this a second-degree collaboration when public-private partnership is there? Because in public-private partnership, when we say private, we are talking about mercantile legal entities. So an association of citizens is not a mercantile society, or a company. We have these challenges which are of a different order, but we need to implement this mechanism so that we can deploy all of this. And going back to digital twins are at the forefront now. We're doing it with buildings, etc. This is progressing, and this allows us to do an energy planning, which was the dream a few years ago. It was the top-notch research, and now it has become a reality. In Campalans, we've done a very interesting piece of work with the environment and with the knowledge of the town council, where we are precisely trying to do what we call a sandbox, a regulatory testbed or sandbox. But also pointing towards what we heard about Cape Town, not only the technology, not only the way we finance, but also governance and how we get the involvement of different watertight compartments to try and work in a smaller territory, but jointly and in a cross-sectional manner. Thank you very much. We have a few minutes. Mireia, if you want to react to what your colleagues have said, but also, well, I think you could also answer to, from your perspective as a global observer, where are the best results coming up? Small towns, mid-sized towns, a bit of everything, or it depends on the boldness of the city and their rulers? First of all, I will give you work for another seminar, because no one talks about the fact that transitions lead to changes in power relations. Europe has an allergy to talking about that. I think that's one of the cores of all of this transition and all of the routes and the paths of this transition. And cities do not have enough power in Europe or in the different states so as to impose or develop a series of things. So who is better or worse? I do not dare say, but I will give you an example. Singapore shows up as the example of digitalization with results for the fight against climate change. But there they have Internet of Things cameras for anything you can think of, even in order to control the welfare of the elderly. But that comes with something else, because Singapore is not just a city. It is a city-state, and as such they can regulate, they can apply taxes, and they can repress, meaning control, the application of the rules. And I think that these three things are very important in order to be able to exercise and to carry out these transitions. So Pau was saying at the beginning, well, the question was about global, local, smart cities, and the twin transition. And if we are to talk about global, local, I would say local commitment, global action, and thinking always at all levels. Amen to that. I think that's a very good closing. There are probably questions, but if you don't mind, we have the Secretary General ready for the closing, which is important to us as a show of commitment to the foundation of European Socialists, the twin transition. And he will probably be the future president of the Catalan government. So I think it is important that his presence in this room to give us this wonderful closing. I would like to, of course, thank Laia for her commitment and leadership from the city of Barcelona. Aleksandr, Mireia, thank you for being here with us. And we're grateful for your attendance and your attention. Thank you very much.
Comenzamos. Sí. Bueno, pues muchas gracias.
Okay, so let's begin. Thank you all very much. I think it is an honor to all of us and a pleasure, and it is important to have here the first secretary of the Socialist Party of Catalonia, Salvador Illa, in this seminar on the twin transition, ecological and digital. And as we've been discussing, we've been talking about a political movement, Social Democrats, who aspire to changing the lives of people and having a positive impact and building these new consistencies. And this starts with the territory, this starts in Barcelona, as we've discussed, and this continues in Catalonia, a region, a nation within Europe, which is important and which aspires to leading again and being at the at the top of advances. And there's been a very fruitful debate, many ideas that we will share with you. And we hope that in just a few months, you will have the responsibility to lead us to make Catalonia one of the true drivers of Europe again. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, first of all.
And to the House of the Catalan Socialist Party. We welcome you in a very special day for us, because today, 22 years ago, one of our colleagues, one of the more best members of our organization, Ernest Lluch, was killed, was assassinated here in Barcelona. And these last days, yesterday and the day before, we were commemorating promoting the dialogue at a very difficult moment in Spain, in particular in the Basque Country, with one of the highest terrorist movements. He was advocating for the dialogue. No? Ernest Lluch is still inspiring us. No? Está todavía inspirando.
He continues to inspire us. His legacy continues to inspire us, continues to inspire our political actions here in Catalonia and in Spain. And actually, we are trying in our political actions to take many of the things that he taught us into practice. Specifically, first, dialogue. After a few years, very complicated years here in Catalonia, very tough years, in which a part of Catalan society and well, not the majority of Catalan society, but part of the Catalan society and its political leaders have tried to impose a confrontation and a division, a secession from Spain and from Europe. And the only way to overcome this situation is through what Ernest Lluch taught us. Not only that, but well, he taught us that as well, the exercise of dialogue, using dialogue. A dialogue that should allow us to find meeting points. We will not agree to everything, but we will agree to certain things. And this is what we're trying to do from the PSC, from the Catalan Socialist Party, in our political action in Catalonia and in the government of Spain, with President Pedro Sánchez leading us. And today, we're attending one of these exercises of dialogue in Parliament, the debate about the budgets of the state, which will end on Thursday. We hope that with the approval of the budgets, which incorporate funds coming from the EU, an exercise that we also try to replicate here in Catalonia, where we are still at the very initial stages of the debate on the budget. You know, the Catalan government collapsed, broke down, and it is, well, in more than 40 years of self-government, the current government is the one with the weakest supports, and we are trying to help to make the consequences of this not damage Catalan society by depriving it of a budget. This is why we are reaching out to open up a budget debate. We've received the news today that we will have a new meeting to talk about the budget on Wednesday. So there will be a new budgetary meeting on Wednesday, and we hope we will have the necessary documentation to carried out. And in this context, I would like to welcome you to the headquarters of the PSC. And I would like to thank everyone who has participated in this session, specifically the organizations that have participated, the Foundation for Progressive Studies, FEPS, the University of the United Nations, and the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, and all participants, specifically Maria João Rodrigues, the president of the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, FEPS, and Solanilla, and also Laia, Bonet, the deputy mayor in Barcelona. And while combining the green and digital transition is in and of itself a challenge, and the goal we pursue with the green transition is a clear one. By 2050, we should have neutral economies from the point of view of use of carbon. And in the digital transition, maybe the goal is not so clear, so we need to ensure that the digital transition is carried out in a sustainable manner. And it also should assist the green transition. This means that we need to cooperate between different territories. In the case of the European Union, it is particularly relevant to cooperate with the north of Africa, and I know that this has been discussed during today's session. It is a strategic region, very relevant for Europe, for Spain specifically, and also for Catalonia, and it will require an approach by the EU which is a lot more open. Also, well, let me show some pride about the fact that a key member of our political organization, the PSC, is Vice President of the European Commission, Josep Borrell, whose responsibility is the foreign policy of the Union. I think he is also an adequate person to promote all of these challenges that we are talking about. And I also know that some papers have been mentioned today, significant papers that will give us a push to continue working along these lines. And at the level of the cities, you know that in May next year, in a bit over 6 months, there will be municipal elections in Spain, and we need to stress and focus on these two transitions, the green and the digital transition. Barcelona has always had leadership positions in both because of its potential cosmopolitan nature, entrepreneurial character, and for being, if you allow me, and with all modesty, a very good example of public management. We aspire to, also in the digital and green transition, Barcelona can be the banner and the inspiration for other cities. It is impossible nowadays to do policies without sharing international experiences, and doing it so in the progressive environment responds to our tradition and our way of doing things. And I must say again that it is a source of pride that the PSC headquarters is hosting the seminar today, the conclusions of which we will read and study in depth and in detail. So thank you very much, and I hope you will have a very nice evening here in Barcelona.